Ujambo, beautiful people. You are tuned in to the Espresso Talk Today show, the show that keeps it real about Black empowerment and Black liberation. I'm your host, Alma Robin, and today we are diving deep into a topic that's been festering for way too long. A situation of white supremacy hidden in plain sight. Aquaba, my brothers, sisters, and non-binary individuals to the Espresso Talk Today podcast show. So I'm saying white supremacy hidden in plain sight, what does that mean? I think many of us see white supremacy everywhere and every day. I know I do. I see it in the police. I see it in the school system. I see it in the economy, in the racial wealth gap. I see it in the healthcare system, in the criminal justice system, in the government, in domestic policies, in foreign policies, literally everywhere. So how can white supremacy be hidden in plain sight? Well, stay tuned and stay with me here, because we're going to talk all about it. But before we dive in, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and if you're feeling this show, share it with your fam, your crew, your circle, everyone in your community. By the way, I got a surprise for you. I got someone special to talk with you today. Brother Ben, y'all remember him, will join us for this uncommon conversation. Now grab that espresso and close the door behind you. We're going to get deep and we're going to get real. We're back. Actually, we're just getting started. How can white supremacy be hidden in plain sight? We're talking about statues, monuments, street names, and other markers of white supremacy that still exist right here in the United States. Actually, they're all over the world, but we're going to focus on the United States today. And yep, you heard me right, folks. These symbols of hate and oppression are still standing tall, and it's time that we put a spotlight on them. So let's do it. You know, there are so many monuments and statues glorifying figures from the violent history of white supremacy that are scattered across this nation. Names like Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Nathan Bedford Forrest. They were not heroes. They were champions of slavery and racism and violence. But why are they still around? Why are those monuments still around? I asked myself that question just last week when I was visiting Selma, Alabama. Let me just back up. I actually did not plan to visit Selma. I was making kind of a pilgrimage to Montgomery, Alabama to visit the legacy sites by the Equal Justice Initiative, by EJI. It was an amazing experience. And then I decided to drive to Selma to see the famous bridge where Bloody Sunday happened on March 7th, what year? That's right, 1965, when state troopers attacked John Lewis and over 600 voting rights activists at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. I hesitate about saying the name of the bridge, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. Because therein lies the problem. The Edmund Pettus Bridge, as it was known back in 1965, is today called, yes, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That's right. I drove there and walked the bridge in the footsteps of John Lewis and Anne Boynton, who is one of the most courageous women ever, and so many other courageous voting rights activists. Then I saw that the bridge is still named after the leader of the Ku Klux Klan. That is white supremacy hidden in plain sight. And on that note, we're going to take a short second to breathe and to let this sink in. I will see you in a minute.
Anything is possible. Turn me up in the headphone. Yeah. grind to get a lot of dough, endure through all the obstacles, cause anything is possible. Yeah. Oh man, I got a lot of goals. Stack that bread and by my nose. Anything is possible.
We're back. I hope you took a moment to think about, this thing that the Edmund Pettus Bridge is still called that, even today. That is a lot to process. So that's why I think it's a great idea to take a minute to breathe and let it sink in. I'm turning the mic over now to my co-host. Let's welcome Ben to the show.
So, we're back. I'm Ben and I'm co-hosting this great podcast episode. So let's get right back into it. So there are a lot of different ways to address the issue of white supremacy in general and these white supremacist statues. But let's take a moment to consider 5 different options. See, I often cringe when I hear people say they know all the options or they know exactly what to do. And trust me, I wish it were more simple, but let's just get right into the nitty-gritty of all of it. So the first one is removal and destruction. Now, this is personally a really tempting one. Like when you see some of these, you just want to take a baseball bat to some of these white supremacist leaders because there's something cathartic about it. But many argue that these markers should still be removed. In a more serious note, many argue that these markers should be removed and destroyed because they serve as painful reminders of a violent period in American history. Now, removing them can be a symbolic act of rejecting racism and promoting inclusivity. And honestly, on like a personal level, it can be a way of saying, look, enough. We're not living with this anymore. No more praising murderers and rapists. No more praising people who pillaged these other countries, who pillaged other people, and then were celebrated for it by a sick society. Something about that feels pretty twisted and wrong. There should really be no more tolerating of racism in tolerating those statues. And no more dismissing the personal experiences of people. And in turn, no more diminishing of the continued impact these markers have on Black people and people of color. Now, this is cathartic in some ways, but there are also some other perspectives on this. Many people would disagree and say that, look, by getting rid of these statues, you're actually erasing history. They might say that it's taking away the story, that people can't learn from this terrible history. And it's a really fine line to walk between maintaining a statue and learning the problematic history, and maintaining a statue and celebrating that person and that history. It's not easy to walk. And I think that as we've seen these other people try to eradicate our history and take down our names, I think the white supremacist structure is trying to use a similar logic to that. The only issue is we are trying to provide the full story to it and not just celebrate one side, right? Although we should also say that there is a big difference between celebrating the victims of these atrocities and celebrating or maintaining structures that support the perpetrators of those atrocities. And I think that Ron DeSantis and other racism deniers would really like this idea of maintaining those people, or even of putting them in museums instead. So the next option we have is the relocations to museums. So some people propose that moving these markers to museums or dedicated historical sites where they can be presented is another way to educate visitors about their historical significance and the harm they represent. This approach allows for historical preservation while also including a proper context. This really is one of my favorite approaches because it educates, informs, but still doesn't entirely eradicate that history. Meanwhile, it doesn't allow the marker to stand in the way of progressive movements trying to get rid of white supremacy. It also doesn't erase the history of those stories. It educates. However, critics of this approach argue that placing these markers in museums may not fully address their impact, and they could still be viewed as honoring the individuals or ideologies they represent. Going back to storytelling, whose story is told and how, this museum could still be telling the story in a way which maintains their power in society and ignores the victims or doesn't construct them as perpetrators of atrocities. See, it also raises questions about funding, maintenance, and whether museums have the capacity to house all of these markers. Now, honestly, museums, of course, will find the capacity to house these markers. Like, that's not really going to be an issue. But one thing to consider is, there is another consideration, which is, do you want your tax money to be going towards this? I mean, looking at these monuments in the United States and around the world, if you live in those countries, you're paying taxes to support those monuments. You also want to pay taxes to a museum which either maintains this problematic story or tells a new story. These are real considerations. See, because my real concern is honoring white supremacists through taxes, which, I mean, if you're an American citizen, I'm sorry, but we all know that's kind of what's going on, especially if we look in the Middle East right now. So if the history is presented well and the stories are included, this really can work, but it all depends on which stories are presented and how they're presented. So the ultimate goal is still to educate, and I don't think any of us here are opposed to education. So then we come to our third option as well, which has kind of been a through line throughout the first two options we discussed today, namely giving context and interpretation. So the pro of this is that instead of a removal, some suggests that adding contextual information to these markers, such as plaques or signage that explains the historical context, the harm caused by individuals or ideologies they present, could be another way of managing this. I mean, here's one example. So during the summer, I went on this colonial tour of Lisbon, which discussed all the different markers, relevant colonial markers of Portuguese colonial and of the Portuguese history of colonialism and slavery. This was I'd honestly recommend anyone to go to this, go on this tour. It was fantastic. But what he did, he would walk on these streets, and some of them just had, I forgot the exact names, but he would say, look, the street was called something in Portuguese, which I can't really remember. But underneath, apparently, it was a mass grave. Just hundreds of black people were buried under the street. And there are people out just enjoying themselves, having a good time. But there wasn't any plaque to memorialize this. I mean, if we look at this from just a basic human interpersonal perspective, these are just people dead beneath you, which, me personally, I'm uncomfortable with knowing that, but I'm more uncomfortable with there not being any knowledge of it. So I think this is one example of giving context and interpretation to people who live there. But also, it makes it easier, to understand why something happened, or who the person, or who the street, or what this monument represents. If you can actually see where it happened, or where the person may have lived. And the additional information is, again, an educational tool. So this option is another way for people to learn the history. And we all support that here. So, however, there are other perspectives on this. Not everybody agrees on that. And that's okay, to some extent. So critics might argue that a simple contextualization might not be sufficient to counteract the harm caused by these markers, and that they should still be removed from the prominent public spaces. Now, this might not be enough. It could work, but it could also just be another way of allowing white supremacy to stay hidden in plain sight. Many people might not look for the context or additional information, or they would just see and possibly admire the statue of Robert E. Lee. Going back to our trip to, really to the entire Deep South, but specifically Montgomery, Alabama, there were a lot of plaques up discussing the history. There's the famous Alabama River that runs next to the center of Montgomery. And they had plaques up talking about, quote unquote, goods and services which were being distributed on that river. Of course, there were human beings being distributed there. So this is one way of, sort of providing the story, but not actually doing it. And that is a potential outcome of this approach as well. Yeah, it's really problematic. And reading it, you might feel more uncomfortable with, okay, people might read this and actually think, okay, it was just goods and services, without actually knowing what happened. So this takes us to our fourth option here: transformation into new monuments. Honestly, I think this might be my favorite. So this involves transforming old markers of white supremacy into new monuments or artwork that promote unity, justice, and racial equality. So this approach can symbolize a shift away from the past while repurposing existing materials. So, for example, looking at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So while we were all walking on the bridge, we all sort of started calling it, just amongst ourselves, the John Lewis Bridge, after the civil rights activist and former senator. That felt right. That felt like a form of, okay, we're kind of decolonizing this bridge just for ourselves. There was power in it. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that, okay, we want this to be named the John Lewis Bridge, but what was the name before that? And why was it named that? You lose this important context as well. So that's a really hard thing to balance. There was also another man we met there who, referring back to the previous option we discussed, said there should at least be a little sign giving context. But to keep it real, who's going to read a sign on a bridge? Of course, this is a historical bridge, but still. Yeah, so that's one form of decolonization of these specific locations. However, there are also more criticisms for this option. So the critics might say that transforming these markers may not fully address that historical harm, and it may be difficult to repurpose them effectively. So we really can't recreate history, or transform history, or change the past, or take a time machine and, change everything that happened. But more importantly, we can't rename things without losing some of the impact as well. How much will we lose if we actually change those names? But it is nevertheless worth losing some of that history by what we would gain, isn't it? By transforming some of these markers into something that honors the people who actually fought for justice and progress. Of course, those are going to be subjective perspectives, though, subjective concepts, so it will lead to a lot of debate. This leads to number 5 for the options here: community decision-making. Some believe that the fate of these markers should be decided through community discussions and consensus-building processes. Involving affected communities allows for a democratic and inclusive decision-making approach. So, honestly, this is another possibility, but it also corresponds to all of the other ones we've spoken of. As you can see, there's a lot of, they're all very interconnected. Community decision-making is often considered a form of socialism, even anarchism in some approaches of it. But it can also be effective. Not that those other forms aren't necessarily effective. So as we remember and discuss and preserve the history, it can be an interesting way of bringing people together as well in the community. Why? Because the people and events and the stories happened to that community. So shouldn't they have the agency to be able to change those the monuments that celebrate these perpetrators as well? Haven't these communities also been marked by that history? And shouldn't they also then be on the front lines of deciding how the markers will be viewed and treated? I don't know. I would say yes, intuitively, of course. I think most of us would say yes. But there are still critics to this approach. Critics of the community decision-making approach believe that the bridge belongs to everyone, so everyone can decide the future of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But we should also think about which communities are involved here. Going back to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, yes, Selma is very much a black city, and Alabama in general is a very largely black populated state. But let's not throw around the word community like it doesn't mean anything. There are also white supremacist communities just all around the city of Selma, and they are also the ones who are connected to the people in power there. Edmund Pettus, yes, he was a Ku Klux Klan member. Well, he was actually a Grand Dragon, which means he was a state leader for the Ku Klux Klan, the state leader of that chapter. But he was also a senator. And let's not think that just because we don't see Confederate flags around, that they're gone. No, that's just not the case. So I think it really depends on which communities are being involved here and being included, and who actually gets to decide who's at the table for it. But going back to funding, critics also say that funding to handle the bridge is too much for the little town of Selma. Yeah, it's only like one of the most historically relevant civil rights locations in the United States. So that's disappointing, but not surprising. And furthermore, it's still understandable that many people believe that communities are too close, too small, and too divided to be responsible for these historical markers. That we should all decide. I mean, that's democracy in action, right? I mean, but the we should all decide approach, who is we and who actually gets to have a decision there? I mean, the reason for the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge for Bloody Sunday was voting rights, and voter suppression is still rife in Selma, Alabama. I think I spoke to a man there, and don't quote me on this, but I believe it was only 17% of eligible voters had been registered to be able to vote in the elections. It's not for a lack of trying, but there are structural constraints to these issues. So, anyways, those were the 5 options of what to do about white supremacist historical markers. Which ones did you support? So, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but there will actually be a vote for this, because we're democratic here, and y'all are a community. So, y'all be able to vote on this on Instagram as well, and we'll put a story up about that. So, we'd love to hear y'all's opinions. So, just to reiterate the different options, the first one was removal and destruction. Number 2, relocation to museums. Number 3, giving context and interpretation. Number 4, transforming into new monuments. Number 5, community decision making. And that was all of them. But for now, let's take a moment to breathe and consider what history means to us and what impact it continues to have today. When we return, we'll take a different look at historical markers. Spoiler alert, think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Anything is possible. Turn me up in the headphone. Yeah. Trying to get a lot of dough and dirt through all the obstacles, cause anything is possible. Yeah. Oh man, I got a lot of gold. Stack that bread and by my nose. Anything is possible. Yeah.
Ooh, I just love those words. Welcome back, my powerful people. I hope that you had some time to reflect on what we should do with these white supremacist historical markers. And yes, I will put up a poll on my Instagram page at ama_Robin_L, and I hope that you'll let me know your thoughts. Leave me a comment too. Your opinions matter to me. I want to know what you think about all of this, because it's a lot to take in. And we are going to switch gears to discuss some other historical markers. Remember, Ben gave you a little spoiler alert in the last section. Oh, and by the way, a big asante sana to Ben for returning to Espresso Talk Today to co-host this show with me. He's never left. He's always been around, and he really wanted to be on this show. So asante sana, Ben. Really appreciate everything that you do. So, yes, we're switching gears here. We're going to discuss other historical markers, and these focus on Black history and how we can preserve and honor Black history. I'm going to mention a few Black history markers that everyone should visit. I usually do this during Black History Month, but this seems like a better time. I don't want to be distracted by racism and white supremacist history. I really want to bring my energy into honoring and preserving Black history and the Black contributions around the world. We're going to begin with, I think you know who we're going to begin with, Martin Luther King. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C. This iconic memorial honors the civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it features a towering statue of Dr. King and includes excerpts from his famous I Have a Dream speech. Other speeches too. Yeah, there were other speeches too, but this is also there as well. I'm going to list just a few here. Don't bother writing them down. They're going to be up on my website and up on my Instagram page. But I'm just going to run through a few because I just want to balance this out, because I don't always want to talk about white supremacy. I want to talk about the great things Black people are doing. The next one, you can probably guess, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, also in Washington, D.C. And while this isn't a traditional monument, this museum stands as a testament to African American history and culture. It features exhibits on the African American experience from slavery to the civil rights movement and beyond. And I can tell you this was an amazing exhibit. And if you go downstairs, you get all the history, starting from, even before slavery to the going back to the Middle Passage, back to being captured in various different countries in Africa. And it even had, Nat Turner's Bible. I'm sorry, I'm just getting choked up and just kind of lost my train of thought because I'm so choked up about that. His actual Bible was there. It's an amazing exhibit. Also go upstairs and you'll see the culture. And I can tell you, that's where I end up spending most of my time. Although they both compete. Try not to go on the same day because there's so much to see. Now this brings back a very recent memory, this next one. The Rosa Parks statue in Montgomery, Alabama. Rosa Parks, known as the mother of the civil rights movement. And her statue is located at the Rosa Parks Library and Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, commemorating her courageous stand against segregation. She's done a lot of stuff, a lot. I went to this museum just a few weeks ago, and it was powerful and positive. I really loved the, I put in quotes, tour that we took in a 1950-style bus through various important events in Black history, like the Dred Scott decision, and the Montgomery boycott too, which started in 1955 and lasted 381 days. This was really a multimedia experience. You really got to go see it and experience it, really. The next one, the African Burial Ground National Monument in New York City. This monument honors the memory of enslaved and free Africans buried in Lower Manhattan during the 17th and 18th centuries. It serves as a reminder of the African presence in the early New York City area. And did you know that New York had slavery? I first learned that at this Legacy Museum in Montgomery. This isn't talked about very much, but there were many enslaved people in New York until it was abolished in that state in 1827. Next, we have the Underground Railroad Freedom Center. What city? Cincinnati, Ohio. This museum and cultural center focuses on the history of the Underground Railroad and the heroes who helped enslaved people escape to freedom. And kind of related to that, we have the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historical Park in Maryland. This park commemorates the life and legacy of Harriet Tubman, and we know what she did. This was one of the most courageous women ever. She led many enslaved people to freedom through the Underground Railroad. And here's one we don't hear very much, the Medgar Evers Home National Monument in Jackson, Mississippi. This monument honors the civil rights activist Medgar Evers, who was assassinated in 1963. That's right, he was shot on his front lawn. The man had 5 kids. He was an amazing activist and was fighting for justice, and he was shot down on his front lawn in 1963. And it includes his former home and serves as a reminder of the contributions to the struggle for equality. In my opinion, Medgar Evers just doesn't receive the credit that he deserves for his intellect and courage during the civil rights movement. And he was right there on the front lines, and every single day, and in the planning, and the oversight. He was an amazing person, and I think going to his home, which is now a national monument, is I think one of the best ways that we can honor him. Sorry, I'm getting choked up again. Here we have the last one I have is the Black Wall Street Memorial in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's a remembrance of the Tulsa Race Massacre in 1921. This memorial honors the businesses and communities that was destroyed during that violence. We're hearing more about Black Wall Street now, but it had remained a kind of a ghost-like, figment for most of my life. But this has changed. Now Black people are remembering and honoring this vibrant neighborhood that was brutally and savagely destroyed by the white community. So these monuments and markers celebrate the resilience, achievements, and contributions of Black people and Black communities throughout American history. And they serve as important reminders of the ongoing struggle for civil rights and social justice. As well as they provide an opportunity for education and reflection for all Americans, everyone. I'm going to stop here for just a minute. I have this list, by the way, on my Espresso Talk Today website. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much info, but I also, put this on my website, and I've also put on the website a list of lesser known Black historical sites. It's a great to remember the biggies, but it's also important to go off the track and remember those who didn't get all the fame and fortune. Okay, not a lot of fortune, but who aren't so well known. So I'll put them on the website and list them on my Instagram page under Ama Robin L. And by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm not listing or mentioning any of the white supremacist historical markers. Okay, I talked about the bridge, but that's it. Just to make a point, on my website or Instagram, page. They don't deserve my attention. But we're going to wrap this up soon. But before I do, I have one more point that I want to make. And stay with me, because it's important. Is this decision about this discussion about white supremacist markers just a distraction? Remember we talked about racism as a distraction? Should we spend time focusing on the monument of Robert E. Lee, or should we spend energy and resources building banks in our communities and other community support services? Is it an either-or question? I don't think it is. But let's close by focusing really on the real issue and the real enemy. The real enemy, white supremacy. This is a good idea, to take a quick break, to gather our thoughts and energy, and to get prepared to confront this persistent scourge. Y'all might not be ready for this, but take a minute to breathe, stretch, or do whatever. Uplift your spirit, meditate if you need to, close your eyes. I will see you in a minute. I'm back. We're back. And yes, we've been discussing white supremacy hidden in plain sight throughout this show. On previous shows, we have discussed white supremacy in plain sight, like racism, police violence, and microaggressions. But now I'm saying that the real enemy is white supremacy? Yes, I am. And yes, that's right. Yes, we've got to totally dismantle white supremacy. That would make a lot of problems go away. Would it make white supremacist historical markers go away? Yeah, great question. Maybe. Are we focusing on the wrong thing now, though? We're looking at taking away the historical markers, but should we be focusing on taking away white supremacy? Are the discussions about the removal or preservation of white supremacist markers a distraction from the broader fight against white supremacy? Here, I want to give a few perspectives here. First, it's about symbolic change versus systemic change, real change. Some people say that focusing on monuments and markers, while symbolically significant, should not divert attention or resources or energy from the systemic issues of racism and white supremacy. They believe that dismantling monuments alone won't address the root causes of inequality. What do you think? Can symbolic change spark systemic change, or does symbolic change distract from systemic change? Good question. I don't have the answer. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Now, another thing is that, multiple fronts. Others argue that the fight against white supremacy should be waged on multiple fronts simultaneously, addressing both the symbolic and the systemic aspects of racism is essential to create a more equitable society, to defeat white supremacy. Do you think this is a good approach, or does it dilute our power, our energy, and focus too much? Let me know. So there are also, let's talk about education and awareness. There are also discussions about controversial markers that can serve as opportunities to educate the public about the historical context of white supremacy and its enduring impact. These conversations can raise awareness and inspire action against systemic racism. Do you think that's really going to happen, or is this just a remote possibility? Okay, and finally, I want to talk about community priorities. The removal or preservation of specific markers may be a community-driven decision. Communities may prioritize addressing symbols of hate and oppression as part of the broader efforts to combat racism. Do you think communities are best positioned and resourced to fight white supremacy? I throw out these questions, because I really don't have the answers. And I really would like to know what you think. And I'd love it if you would go to my website or email me at team@espressotalktoday.com, because we are a team here. So email me. I would love to hear your thoughts about this. These are just a few approaches to fighting white supremacy, but rooting it out at its foundation and destroying it. These are just a few approaches. Personally, I like all of these approaches because you never know what's going to work, what's going to stick, and what won't. You never know which approach will work in a certain situation. But most of all, let's remember that the white supremacy is the real enemy of Black people and all people of color. A statue of Jefferson Davis, that's my mistake. A statue of Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the Confederacy, can be pulled down, but that won't stop police aggression and violence, or close the wealth gap or the health gap, race gap that exists between Black and white people, or protect Black girls from adultification, or prevent Black boys from becoming part of the prison industrial complex. I understand, though, I get it. Seeing those white supremacist historical markers can make you feel angry or dehumanized or vulnerable. It can feel like a reminder that white supremacy and anti-Black racism are still ever present in our daily lives. Seeing those markers emphasizes that things may have changed a bit, but that they haven't changed enough, not nearly enough. The system needs to go today. And removing and destroying white supremacist historical markers can feel empowering. It can send a message that we are still fighting back and that we intend to win this battle. That is powerful. And I think on that note, it's time to take one last breather break here. Then we're going to wind it down. And I got a little extra information that I think you're going to want to know. Okay, I'll see you in a minute. Welcome back, y'all. So, what's the game plan, you ask? I'm glad you asked, because I do have a plan. This is just mine. I'm going to throw it out there and see what you think. First, we have to keep the pressure on the local and state governments. Let's make our voices heard, organize protests, and demand change. We've got the power to make a difference, and we're really not backing down. No more. And don't forget to vote. Vote, vote, vote. Elect leaders who are committed to dismantling white supremacy in all its forms. For me, that's a primary issue. If they're willing to accept some parts of racism and say, well, we need to wait or to think about this, or it's a complicated issue, then they've lost my vote, because some of these things are not complicated at all. So, but that's my priority. Think about yours and vote accordingly. So yes, elect leaders who are committed to dismantling white supremacy, and it's time to hold our elected officials accountable and push for policies that promote unequivocally equality and justice. And just to repeat, my fam, I'm not just talking about removing white supremacist symbols or markers. It's about addressing the root causes of white supremacy. And we need to educate our youth and ourselves about the true history of this country. We need to revamp the curriculum so that our kids understand the impact of racism and the struggle for civil rights and the struggle for liberation. Knowledge is power, and truth is invincible. In closing, let me leave you with this. White supremacy may be hidden in plain sight, but it won't stay there for long if we keep on this track. We are on a mission to expose it, and to deal with it. We have lots of different options we talked about, but we're dealing with it now. And this is where Black empowerment will reign supreme. Congratulations for showing the courage and character to discuss dismantling white supremacy wherever you find it, in your face or hidden in plain sight. It takes courage, and you've showed it today. Remember that while we are dismantling white supremacy, we can also invest in supporting Black empowerment and Black liberation. Earlier in this show, I mentioned several Black history markers and remembrances. I hope that you will visit them and learn more about them. I've also researched other Black history markers that are not as well known, and you can find them on the Espresso Talk Today website at espressotalktoday.com and on my Instagram page at Ama Robin L. You know it, Ama _Robin _ the letter L. Have you heard, I'm just going to ask you this, have you heard of Denmark Vesey? Okay then, I think you're definitely going to want to learn more about this previously enslaved man who started one of the biggest rebellions of enslaved people in American history. He was tough, he was smart, and he was determined. And yes, there is a monument to him. Please remember the poll. Remember the poll about what to do with white supremacist historical markers. I'm going to post that poll on my Instagram page several different times. Your vote matters. Your voice matters. Don't let me down. Let me know what you think. You don't have to agree with me. I don't know if I agree with me, but I want to know what you think. And remember, my fellow warriors, know this deep in your soul. White supremacy still exists, and it is wrong wherever you find it. And we have the privilege of exposing it and dismantling it and building a society where justice and equality are real for everyone. If you want to keep discussing or just reading about these issues, then please subscribe to my weekly Black empowerment newsletter, The No More Beat. We discuss lots of different issues there. Get your dose of Black empowerment every single week. Never a dull moment, but lots of growth moments. You can subscribe on the Espresso Talk Today website at espressotalktoday.com or on my Instagram page. And join us on Instagram to discuss these issues, share your thoughts, and find an uplifting and safe space. I'm Ama Robin for Espresso Talk Today. And remember, now more than ever, strength, soul, and reparations. Ashe, community.